and welcome to the 27th episode of Recluse Horror. This is a daily horror movie review podcast. Just a little background on the project. Back 294 days ago, I decided I wanted to watch and review a horror movie every single day. I have done so, as I said, for the past 294 days, although only the last 27 have been podcasts. Before that, they were text reviews. So, I mentioned yesterday that I've got stuff I've got to do today. I've got a thing today. And I was planning on just, trying to sort everything out early and get in a full movie today. But I'm really excited and stupidly distracted. So, I decided I'm going to watch just a short film again today. And in fact, it's another short foreign film, like yesterday. This one was a longer one. I think it was a little over 30 minutes. It's called Skuld, or Guilt, is the English title, from 2014. It's a Danish film. I'm also going to have to apologize because it is like noise-ageddon in my house right now. One of my roommates is two of my roommates are putting up shelving right now. One's in the shower. The dog outside is just going crazy, so... not my dog, one of my neighbor's dogs has just been barking again all day. So if you're hearing a bunch of background interference and stuff, again, I try to filter out as much as I can, but a lot of that stuff can't really be filtered. At least not by me. Not good at that. Anyway, this one was good. It definitely has some problems. It's not the very best thing that I've seen, but it's very moody and atmospheric. The locations and sets that they're not sets, they're not built on a soundstage or anything like that, but the locations are very nice and really kind of have a very good overall artistic feel to them. But there's a bit of a problem with some of the questions that are left unanswered by the end of it, are a little bit needling. It's nothing too harsh, but I feel like with a movie that's over 30 minutes long, I feel like you could have thrown in, dedicated a couple of minutes of that to actually explaining, some of the questions. There's one big one that, if you watch this, you'll definitely get. But honestly, I still think it's worth watching regardless. Like I said, very good atmosphere and mood. The sound design is very good. The dialogue is interesting. It feels, fairly natural while still, there's a really good scene where two characters are talking that I really appreciate. But I haven't talked about the actual plot of this movie because I cannot focus on anything. So, the basic premise of the movie is there's a woman, she works as like an in-house nurse, basically, that is caring for someone who is, at the end of her life, essentially. Much like some of the other movies that I've seen more recently, actually, like, I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives Inside the House, and, I mentioned this on that podcast episode, or not podcast episode, that was a text review. I haven't, reviewed that yet, but there's a podcast called Mabel that has a similar premise. Again, it's like an in-house maid for somebody, not necessarily completely at the end, but if you do watch this and you kind of like this, but you wanted something a little like where a little more happens, Mabel is a good place to go. I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives Inside the House is, like, to me, the best version of this story that I've seen. Again, it is slow, it's atmospheric, not as much happens, but it's very good regardless. It's worth watching to me. And that's by the director that I had mentioned before. I can't remember his name offhand. Osgood Perkins, who did The Girl in the Photographs and... oh gosh, what was that one that we did the other day? Was it The Blackcoat's Daughter? I'm gonna check. Yeah, it was The Blackcoat's Daughter. That's what it was. But, Osgood Perkins. This has a very similar feel to I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives Inside the House, which I really liked. I think I liked it better than Blackcoat's Daughter in a lot of ways, but they're completely different. They're just different. They're just different movies, for sure. So, it's really hard to sort of summarize what works in this movie, other than, like I said, it's good at, building mood. The pace felt a little slow to me, but with how ridiculous I am being today, I think that's a combination of coffee and, anticipation. So I shouldn't have picked a slow movie, but, it is definitely slow. I would probably say it's slow even if I weren't, in this particular mood, but, it does a pretty good job of building in a pretty good feeling, a good creep. There was one jump scare in this that actually got me, and it's very rare that happens. I can probably count on one hand, maybe two, the number of jump scares in any of the movies I've watched in the past 294 or whatever days. So, yeah, it was pretty good. Or again, either that or I'm just weird and jumpy today. So, yeah, I don't really know what else to say. There's not, other than the questions that don't get answered, the visuals are very good. They combine a number of different types of horror. I won't say what types they are because that's sort of a spoiler, but overall, it's just a really neat feeling. There's a very good sort of section of dialogue towards the middle of the film that doesn't really have anything to do with horror necessarily, but it's a very good section of dialogue, I thought. The film sort of feels slightly incomplete to me without that one question answered. And it's really, really open-ended, that particular question. They don't even seem to try to address it. They don't imply anything. They just, go with what they have. But again, as I said before, I really still think this is worth watching. If you're looking for something moody, or, if you liked I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives Inside the House, then this is a good one to watch. Maybe don't watch them back to back because they are sort of similar in a lot of respects. Or if you like Mabel, then you would probably like that. I think that would be a very, very good fit. Mabel being that podcast I mentioned before. The cinematography in this is really good. They frame a lot of very good shots. There's some very scenic looking locations, and they use them quite effectively. The effects generally, they're pretty decent. They don't, in the very first image that you get, the very first sort of effect that you get is a little abrasive, just because it comes on pretty early in the film, and you're not into the vibe yet, which is something I've found a lot more recently, actually, in movies, where they try to just throw you in there and they don't give you enough time to suspend your disbelief a little bit. But it's not a bad image. It just is it looks like the movie's not going to be good. At least to me it did when that image first showed up. I was like, oh, this is just going to be some nonsense. But I honestly do think it was worth watching. Yeah, really, there's not much else I can talk about with this one. It's good. It's free. You can find it on YouTube. I know it's on Vimeo. That's where I watched it. And I would suggest it to anybody who likes atmospheric movies, anybody who likes foreign horror, anybody who likes free stuff. Basically, if you are a horror fan and you wanted to see something free, it is free on Vimeo. So go ahead and check it out. Well, that's my review of Guilt, or Skuld. I don't know how to pronounce that, so I apologize if it's wrong, from 2014. So the other movie that I wanted to talk about today is one that I didn't really enjoy. But again, I'm trying to do things quickly, and there's a really easy criticism to fall back on this one that won't take me a long time to explain. So this movie is The Sacrament from 2013, and I hated it. I think a lot of people actually would enjoy this one, but this movie, it's just Jonestown. It's a smaller scale sort of thing that's happening, but the entire story is just a ripoff of Jonestown, and so there's not really much to talk about with this one. If you know anything about the Jonestown Massacre, or the Jim Jones, the People's Temple, if you know any of that stuff, then you don't need to watch this movie. Basically, the movie, it's framed as a Vice documentary about a man going to visit his sister that is in what most people would refer to as a cult that's recently moved their compound from the United States to, some foreign country. They never really say where. Obviously, this, turns out poorly, as visiting cults often does. So, the movie is fictional and it makes no mention of the real Jonestown Massacre, which makes it seem like plagiarism, though I don't know if you can really call it plagiarism if you're stealing for real life. I don't know. It's if they were literally just doing a horror movie about the Jonestown Massacre, like if it was supposed to be Jonestown, they were just gonna, do the whole Jonestown thing, then that would be one thing. But this just, they take every aspect that is pretty easily publicly available knowledge and turn it into a script for a movie. And I feel like this one got pretty good reviews, but I mean, maybe it's just because I know I've mentioned before, I am a true crime fan. I listen to a ton of true crime podcasts, and I have actually heard the Jonestown tapes. There's audio recordings of the final moments of the people living in the People's Temple in Jonestown, and it's terrible and it's shocking and it's awful. But I'm very familiar with what happened there, and this movie just took all of that information and made it into a fictional movie without changing hardly anything, except for, like I said, it's a smaller scale. I assume they couldn't get as many actors or something, but I don't know. So, first of all, the framing device of the movie is very poor. The Vice graphics and text explaining parts of the story look awful at worst and bland at best. They look nothing like any Vice documentary I've ever seen. The person playing the host does not seem at all like an on-air personality, playing the role of a seemingly normal guy. I have no problem with his normal guy acting, but when he's supposed to be filmed for material that would be used in this actual documentary, he has no energy or even any awareness of his diction or posture when he's on camera, and that is sort of a pet peeve of mine. I know we talked about their watching a couple of days ago, and that was framed so well. It felt like the thing it was going for. It was going for like an HGTV documentary, and it hit that. It nailed it on the head. Anytime anybody was in front of the camera, everything they were choosing to film, how they filmed it, it was perfect. This is the complete opposite. I've seen a number of Vice documentaries. I know a couple of people who've been in Vice documentaries. So I've seen some of them a few times. And this just was not a good version of that. At no point during the film do you really see the crew trying to film narration for the piece like you did in some of the other some of the other like found footagey sort of movies that you'll find. And the camera work is often shoddy in a way that can't really be explained by the angle that they're going for. The Vice documentary that goes to this shit basically. There's a specific shot where the host is on the back of a vehicle with the camera pointed up at him, and the lens flare from the sun and the trees behind him totally washes him out to the point that you can't see part of his face during some of it. This was a short scene that easily could have been reshot, but they didn't. The very first scenes in the beginning, when they're supposed to be explaining how they got involved with this situation, are washed out in a way that seems like maybe damaged film or a bad filter or something, but I'm pretty sure this was filmed digitally, so there shouldn't be any film to damage. In any case, there's no excuse for it in such a widely released movie. It's just sloppy. And those the first shots that I mentioned, there's no reason why you would add anything to this, and I don't see how the film could be damaged, So as far as the rest of the movie is concerned, it's okay. I mean, if you ignore the problems I've already mentioned, it's okay. The acting is pretty good all around, other than the problems that I had with the main guy when he was supposed to be, on camera. The sets are pretty shabby, but not in the way I would expect houses built under those circumstances would be. They're like prefabricated looking semi-permanent like trailer houses, and they're all painted the same drab shade of light brown, but the paint looks completely new even though they're meant to have been there for a while by the time the crew gets there. The color palette of this movie is very drab in general, but it's not in a way that seems intentional, so it just seems visually pretty uninteresting in most ways. The only thing I can think is that they were maybe trying to make the images of what happens eventually down the line seem more interesting or more shocking and stark in contrast, and that just, to me, it didn't play. The story, as I mentioned, it's just Jonestown. So there are far fewer people supposedly in this compound than there were in Jonestown, like less than a fifth of the people, though it looked like even less than that, like a lot less than that. So the scale of it is a lot less impressive. Despite that and the photographs that exist of the Jonestown massacre, they try to use the same sort of overhead shots that you can find in the photos of the place. I'm sure you've probably seen it, even if you don't think you have, you've probably seen the photos of the massacre. And they use the same overhead shots that are supposed to show the scale of the aftermath, but it really doesn't look like much, just like a few dozen people. So it was almost funny how it looked like they were like trying to show the scale of this disaster. And you know what, if this happened around you in a real place or whatever, it would be devastating. That's dozens of people. But I mean, if you've seen those overhead shots of Jonestown, it is devastating on a much larger scale, obviously, as it's not a few dozen people, it's hundreds of people. There are so many details that are identical to Jonestown, from the speeches made by the cult leader and the glasses that he wore. He wore the same, like mirrored sunglasses. It made the movie entirely boring to me, as though I'd seen it before, only a better version. I won't describe all of the similarities in case you want to see this, but there are dozens of them. The actor playing the cult leader is even named Gene Jones, which I thought was funny. I mean, not haha funny, but like exhausting, I guess is what I meant, not funny. Jim Jones, Gene Jones. There are plot holes and continuity errors and plenty of other problems, but I suppose if you're not really familiar with the Jonestown massacre, you might find it interesting or possibly even slightly shocking at times. If you are familiar, you'll probably feel suckered or cheated out of a unique and interesting movie like I did. They shied away from the worst parts of the details of the massacre, or at least a few of them, so it didn't even have that terrible, unflinching realism to fall back on. That's sort of what I thought they were going to go with. They were going to be completely gritty and just get really in the muck and talk about the things that, the general news reports try to gloss over. There are plenty of terrible details in this, and they kind of just play with the don't worry about it method. It does not serve the movie well, in my personal opinion. The other thing I kind of hoped was that they were going to start out making you think it was a movie about a cult gone wrong and switch it to being some sort of like maybe supernatural thing, like they were worshipping some real life monster that slaughters a bunch of people or something. But I think it's only fair to tell you that nothing like that happens in this movie. I really don't think it's the definition of a waste of time. If you know anything about Jonestown, if you've seen any movie with like a cult that's gone wrong, you've seen this movie. There's nothing unique about it. And there are a lot of problems with it, just generally. I can't really think of anything else to say about this one, and I really have to hurry up and put this podcast up before I leave, so I think I'll cut it today. If you enjoyed this podcast for some reason, I don't know why you would, this is a terrible episode, I shouldn't do things when I'm not focused, then please share an episode, maybe not this episode. You can reach out to me on social media at Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. If you're trying to share this with somebody and they don't have whatever platform you use, the podcast is put out on YouTube, Player FM, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Podcast Addict, and pretty much any podcatcher out there. And yeah, I think that's all I really have to say. I apologize that this is like a really bad, rushed, not very in-depth episode, but you weren't going to get another one that was any better today. So tomorrow I promise will be better. I'll watch something really good. I have a few in mind, so anyway. Thank you for listening, and have a great night.